This is such an exciting confluence of luminaries in the field of integrative health and functional medicine gathered tonight. I'm so thrilled to see everyone here and our large audience watching this webinar from around the world. Everyone has such an important point of view around this idea of going beyond conventional perspectives on immunity to transforming our health for higher states of well-being and happiness. Along those lines, I'd like to introduce a world leader in the area of health, wellness, and consciousness. Dr. Tony Nader is an MD and PhD, trained at Harvard University and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's a neuroscientist, a teacher, and a scholar, and has spent decades researching the confluence of neuroscience and consciousness and health. And now he's applying those discoveries in practical programs through his leadership of the International Transcendental Meditation Organization, which has taught millions of people to restore their own inner health and well-being through these programs of yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, and consciousness. So please, Dr. Nader, will you share with us your thoughts on enlivening the body's own inner intelligence through awakening consciousness? And by the way, Dr. Nader is traveling tonight internationally, so we're unable to get his video feed, but we do have his audio presentation with us tonight. So please go ahead, Dr. Nader.
It is a great joy to be connected to everyone on this conference, even though it's a webinar through a distance due to the conditions and circumstances of today. But it's a very important aspect of health that is being discussed, and it is my great joy that I can participate in this and highlight one very important aspect that is often ignored in the treatment of disease and the prevention of disease. There is, of course, the desire to have integrated medicine, which means a medicine that takes into consideration health from the broadest possible perspective, which means includes exercise, diet, daily routine, proper behavior, and paying attention to things that can harm the physiology, pesticides, organic food, and all of these aspects. And also giving the physiology and the mind and the body, the nervous system, enough nutrients, balance in minerals, balance in vitamins, and all these aspects. So these aspects are essential, and I'm sure they will be discussed in the preparation of the physiology to deal with any upcoming situations such as stress, fear, but also viruses, bacteria, stress in society, political upheaval, and all of that. Because if we want really to integrate all aspects that deal with the health of an individual and the prevention of disease, we have also to think of social context, education, and all aspects of the life of a nation, including defense, including the sense of well-being, the assurances that we give to the people. So it's a very wide range of aspects that need to be dealt with. And all these aspects actually come back to one very primordial and important reality and aspect of our human life, which is often ignored, because in general we have no means to address or to attend to that aspect. This aspect is what I would call consciousness or awareness. Consciousness is usually considered as either you have it or not. We have, of course, in medicine different states of consciousness, vegetative states, coma, and different styles of consciousness, but they are mostly on the lower level of consciousness. And we have never really understood scientifically what consciousness is and how to deal with it. But the ancient technologies that we have, such as in transcendental meditation, which comes from the ancient, actually, yoga tradition, it's the yoga of the mind, there are techniques that can develop consciousness. And developing consciousness not only gives the individual greater awareness, greater ability to make right decisions, and are in control of oneself and do less mistakes, but it has a direct impact on the human physiology. The changes in our awareness modify the way the nervous system works, and research has shown that there are changes in the coherence in the brain, for example, and how the brain connects with the different parts of the physiology, in particular the endocrine system and the immune system through the neuroendocrine axis or the neuroendocrine immunology axis. And therefore, there is a very profound influence on the physiology, as has been shown through hundreds of scientific research studies, many of which will be discussed during this conference. So I'd like to, in these few words, to emphasize that aspect and say that this aspect, which is the aspect of awareness, the aspect of consciousness, has a technology that is able to improve it, that it's able to bring it to a level where the individual can think and act in accordance with the best choices that lead to the best outcomes, at the same time improving the physiology, improving the immune system, and preventing disease. Consciousness also is very important during states of pandemics and epidemics of global nature, because when the nervous system is exposed to stress and strain, it tends to react and act in a way that is reflexive and defensive, such as the fight or flight response. And in the fight or flight response, the upper parts of the brain, the intelligence, the decision-making, the poised, really deep level of thinking is actually shut down. And this, of course, comes, as we know, from having the human physiology grow in the jungle and the necessity to be able to react quickly to threatening situations and not to spend time thinking and analyzing or making poetry or philosophy. But unfortunately, shutting down this aspect of the brain make the whole physiology react in a very basic way, in a stress-induced reactions, in a reflexive way, and therefore not give the best outcome. And we see this even in, unfortunately, the behavior of leaders, even in society sometimes, when they are exposed to stress and fear on a global level or on a national level, they become nervous and they react almost sometimes in a not such very poised or completely considered way. And this is natural. It is not to criticize them or anything. Everybody's trying to do their best. But what we're saying is there is a technology to allow the mind to settle down, allow the physiology to be calm, allow the mind also to open up, to be alert. It's not the settling down of sleep, because during these situations one have to be able to react, and therefore there is an activation of the nervous system. But this activation should be on the basis of a restful alertness, not on the basis of a stressful, chaotic situation where the physiology gets upset, the cortisol gets secreted in an imbalanced way, adrenaline goes out, and high blood pressure, and all of these leading to complications and inflammations in the physiology. So we want to keep the physiology rested, calm, working in a proper way, fighting the disease, making the immune system sharp, but not overreacting. And that is very profoundly influenced by the awareness of the individual, by the state of their mind, by their consciousness. And therefore, I urge everyone to consider this as a very primordial, very important, very fundamental aspect of health, health in the next level of our life after the pandemic, but in this century should be more on prevention, more on strengthening the mind, the body, the immune system, and this really requires a very high level of consciousness, of awareness, and this doesn't, again, only mean to be more alert and stressed and strained and the eyes are open and one is ready to fight, but it's a restful state, very restful state, yet broad comprehension, deep awareness, and that is very important for health, for decision making, for behavior, for the individual and for the leadership of society to guide society in the right direction. So congratulations for this webinar. Thank you for having me with you and allowing me to participate and highlight this one important point. I'm sure many other points will be brought out and discussed, and I look forward to listening to all of them and participating again when the occasion arises.
Now I'd like to talk about the power of connection and the loss of connection, which we just experienced a moment ago technologically. But on a deeper level, I'd like to talk about how to transform your immunity and health through the process of restoration of connection from the point of view of the frontiers of modern medicine and discoveries of ancient medicine from Ayurveda and yoga. Modern medicine's been talking about this as deaths of despair, as an era of deaths of despair due to loss of connection with our inner selves. There was a report in the Wellbeing Trust just about a month ago in accordance or in association with the Academy of Family Practitioners that discussed how the epidemic within the epidemic relates to COVID-19 having an unprecedented impact on our world, which we all experience. And along with tens of thousands of deaths in the US, COVID overlays the growing epidemic of deaths of despair. A preventable surge of avoidable deaths, according to the Wellbeing Trust and American Academy of Family Practitioners, from mental health is ahead of us if the country does not begin to invest in solutions that can help heal the nation's isolation, pain, and suffering due to loss of connection. Two surveys published just last month of healthcare providers and the general population reported that 25% of healthcare providers, like us, and the general population are depressed. 28% of the US population and frontline providers report symptoms of anxiety. 35% aren't sleeping well at night. And more than a quarter report acute stress symptoms and probably more. That's the age of depression, according to JAMA Psychiatry, published at the beginning of this pandemic in March 2019. Now, this despair and mental distress has major physical implications. Here's a study published in the JAMA network just a week or two ago, showing the relationship between perceived stress and mortality. The top line shows people reporting low levels of stress and their survival rate. The green line shows people reporting high levels of stress over 4 years' time and their survival rate. Substantially lower survival, that means increased death rate, amongst people who report higher states of despair. I think Eyewitness News got it right. The coronavirus, the stress it causes, and your immune system are all totally relevant for this time. Because the relationship between the brain and perceived stress and the immune system and our cells are mapped out very well now by modern scientists. At the top of this diagram, for those of you who are not physicians in the audience, it shows the relationship between the brain and stress and firing of the sympathetic nervous system and the neurohormones associated with stress like cortisol and others, affecting the immune system. In the middle of this diagram, dysregulating the immune cells, disimpairing or impairing the immune cells and reducing immune effectiveness. And this in turn affects the cells in our body. The lower side of this diagram, you see cellular senescence, which is a technical word, means cell death. So the brain and stress translates into impairing the immune system, and that translates into impaired disease cells and cell mortality. So that's the mind-body connection, totally relevant to our time today and preventing the current health crisis and rising above it to higher states of health, which is the theme of our webinar today. How are we going to do that? Let's look to the frontier of modern medicine, which is called systems medicine. This systems medicine looks at the networks within our body and their interrelationships. On the upper right of this diagram, you see the network of society, of community. Dr. Guarneri talked about planetary health and planetary consciousness. That's a network. And within that are individuals. And each individual is made up of a series of networks. There's a network of the organs, and then the organ systems, and then the cells, and then the DNA, which is itself a network of molecules. But there's even a more profound level in the human system. And that I'd like to show you in this illustration. On the left-hand side, we see an expanded view from modern systems medicine. Beginning at the top, we see planetary health, actually the health of the whole ecosystem that we're connected with in the universe, and then society, and then an individual within society. Individual is made up of organ systems, organs like the heart and others, tissues, cells, macromolecules, and then proteins, RNA, and DNA. But what makes up DNA is at the end of the story. No, our quantum physics friends tell us that DNA is made up of the laws of biochemistry. Our biologist friends tell us that. The laws of biochemistry are made up of the laws of chemistry. The laws of chemistry are made up of laws of physics. And then our quantum physics friends tell us that physics is ultimately described by the field of quantum physics, which describes matter fields and energy fields, electromagnetism, light, and then protons, neutrons, and electrons. And every day it seems like there's a new subatomic particle or field proposed or discovered. But these fundamental basic quantum fields of nature, according to Einstein and contemporary quantum physicists, have their basis in a single unified field of all the laws of physics, at the basis of all the laws of chemistry, at the basics of all the laws of biology and physiology. Therefore, the human system has its ground state in this unified field described by modern science, its micro state in that singularity, that unified state, and its macro state in the universe. That's the network of networks. And you know what? The most ancient health sciences of Ayurveda and yoga describe something very similar. They describe how human beings are a microcosm representing the whole macrocosm and have the whole basis, the intelligence of physiology and actually intelligence of the universe deep within themselves. On the right-hand side of this chart, you see that illustrated and how Ayurveda and yoga describe how one can use technologies for health at each of these different levels, at the macro level, at the physiological level, at the quantum mechanical level, and ultimately there are technologies to operate on the level of the unified field, the basis, the inner intelligence of the body. Dr. Nader was talking about enlivening the inner intelligence of the body with these Ayurvedic technologies, meditation, particularly transcendental meditation, transcending to that innermost level, is one of those technologies to restore balance. And there are many others also. This is a summary of that perspective, the 4 domains of total health. This is a seminar on integrative medicine, on holistic medicine. From the Ayurvedic and the modern systems medicine point of view, you've got to consider the environment. Dr. Guarneri was highlighting that exceptionally. You've got to consider the body. We've been doing that for a long time, although on a gross level or on a level, needs to go further on that one. Got to consider the mind. And now we have to consider what's been largely missing from most modern understandings of medicine, traditional and contemporary, is the inner intelligence of the body, the inner self. In the spiritual traditions, this is called the self or cosmic self or the intelligence of the universe. In the language of modern physicists like Dr. John Hagelin and others, this is the unified field at our basis. These are the 4 domains, and I call this the connectome. We have the genome, which is the system of all of our genes and all of our DNA. We have the microbiome, which is the system of all the microorganisms in our body, which are more than the cells in our body. But now we have the connectome, which is the system of systems that connects all levels, all the networks that comprise our health. And we have to consider our connectome, connect with all these levels to have total health, is the main point of this convergence of the most modern medicines and the most ancient medicines. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, if we look at JAMA Psychiatry from just a couple of weeks ago, psychosocial interventions and immune system function. This article is a meta-analysis of dozens or 100 studies on various psychosocial stress-reducing interventions and concluding that psychosocial interventions are reliably associated with enhanced immune function. Well, we know the theory of that now, the model that we just reviewed a few minutes ago, and therefore may represent a viable strategy for improving immune-related health. There are many psychosocial interventions for reducing stress. I'd like to highlight a comparative effectiveness study that was recently completed and published in Lancet Psychiatry that was funded by the Department of Defense and US Army, who wanted to find out what psychosocial stress reducing interventions would be effective in US war veterans, in this case in the San Diego VA hospital, because war veterans have a high level of PTSD, but don't we know now, a year or two after this study was published, that almost everyone seems to be suffering these days from some level of post-traumatic stress. In this study, veterans were, my colleagues and I randomly assigned veterans to 3 groups: to meditation with transcendental meditation, to cognitive behavior therapy, which with the best known therapy for PTSD called prolonged exposure, CBT, and control. And on the left-hand side of this diagram, you see the first 2 groups, meditation and CBT, had similar results on the primary outcome of reducing post-traumatic stress. Control and attention, education control had very little effect. In the center part of this diagram, we're looking at a secondary outcome of self-reported stress symptoms. And in this aspect of the study, the meditation was actually more effective, modestly more effective than the cognitive behavioral therapy. And then on depression, we saw the same sequence of results: meditation and cognitive behavior therapy and education. And this meditation is a technique for remembering oneself, for reconnecting with one's own inner self, restoring one's mental experience, one's conscious experience to that innermost level of consciousness. And that connection was a very effective method for reducing PTSD. This next study is 700 subjects who are participating in a multimodality Ayurvedic and meditation intervention. These subjects were practicing meditation twice a day. They were consuming an Ayurvedic diet, largely plant-based, according to their mind-body type and their current situation, practicing yoga asanas, taking Ayurvedic herbal supplements to boost their immunity, health, and well-being. And we're following, on average, very much an ideal daily routine according to circadian rhythms, including the sleep cycle. These 700 subjects were compared over 4 years to several 100,000 controls and norms for their region. This is from health insurance statistics that were gathered from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I want to zoom in the areas that are circled. Respiratory diseases were about 80% reduced in the Ayurvedic healthy lifestyle group compared to controls. And infectious diseases, hospitalizations for infectious diseases in the second row, that circle, were about 90% reduced. This was done several years ago, but we would imagine very relevant to today's healthcare crisis, managing their lifestyle. In conclusion, I'd like to say that connection is the key theme that I'd like you to take away tonight. To transform your community and your health. And the connect Om is your innermost self, your mind, body, and environment. And if we can restore balance on each of those levels and the relationship between each of those levels, then we've got total health. And the data shows that practicing the practical technologies to restore balance on each of those levels, and therefore in the wholeness of health, meditation, healthy diet, yoga exercise, herbal supplements, daily routine, all practical technologies. We'll hear a lot more about those in later parts of the webinar. But I have to say, I'm here at Maharishi International University. I teach doctors, the graduate students, the PhD students, and the undergraduate students. We have a rich body of resources here, and anyone could take advantage of these programs. As physicians, for self-care, so important, and for your patients and everyone listening tonight. And I believe that functional medicine has a lot in common with the traditional systems of global medicine. And I really appreciate how functional medicine has expressed those concepts of holism, of environment, body, mind, and spirit, considering all the factors that the world's deepest traditions of medicine are expressing. And I'm really glad to see functional medicine bringing that out today and providing a holistic framework. And I'm really glad we're all joining hands tonight across the country and across the world to bring this knowledge of comprehensive health and well-being. And function becomes structure, and mind becomes body, and consciousness becomes mind, becomes body, becomes planetary health. So we're doing it all here together.